So welcome back. My name's Alison Cave, and I'm going to lead this last session around enabling and leveraging research and innovation in regulatory science. And first of all, I want to thank you for lasting the day. I know it's been a brief break here, but I hope that the coffee has revived you if you've got some with you. Because this is a really, really important session, and we had it last in purposefully because we wanted to build on all of the discussions that have gone on all the day and think about how we might deliver on these ambitious plans and the needs as we've already discussed them. And we have to remember it's a very fast-moving scientific landscape that's already been much discussed today, and hence is absolutely critical to leverage the expertise of the academic community to allow us to deliver on this mission. And Enrico has already called them the engine, and I think that's a really nice terminology. And here I should just say we are focusing on academic community, but of course there are other critical stakeholders and patients and industries, and I think that has been touched on today. So just as a disclaimer now, we're really focusing on how we build partnerships with the academic community. And we know that in order to do that, we have to be interactive and we have to engage. And we're also aware that there's large sectors of academia who are almost completely unaware of the regulatory process and regulatory needs. And it's actually incumbent upon us as regulators to do better at engaging more widely and articulating our needs. And I think Carl Brook talked about how do we influence this environment. And in this session, this is exactly what we want to talk about. We want to discuss how we might build and develop partnerships we already have, discuss what are the best mechanisms to develop new ones, and then how can we really sustain these. And as for all the other sessions, we have 6 panel members at the end who are representative of a range of stakeholders and organisations who will give their views, and I will ask them to keep to 5 minutes so that we have a little bit of time for discussion at the end. So as for all the other recommendations, or whether we have this is talking about enabling and leveraging research. And I just want to take you back to our kind of mission statement, or what was introduced at the beginning, that what we want to do is to catalyze and enable regulatory science and innovation to be translated into patient access. And we've got to remember this is a really evolving healthcare systems. And in order to do that, we really have to apply cutting-edge regulatory science to our review and approval process to allow us to critically assess the applications which are put in front of us. We also need to be continuously informed of scientific innovation that would be relevant to our decision-making, and that's no easy task. And it really requires, therefore, this continual engagement with the academic community to enable us to future-proof our mechanisms. And finally, we need to capitalise on our existing frameworks for collaboration with academias and to build new ones to really articulate regulatory needs and the challenges, because that brings this new disruptive thinking into our system. So as for the other groups, we have 4 main core recommendations, and I'll just talk through these, and then I have a number of underlying actions for each of them. So first of all, to develop these network-led partnerships with academia to undertake fundamental research into really strategic areas of regulatory science. We then, having developed these partnerships, envisage that we can leverage them when we need to address rapidly emerging regulatory science questions, and we've heard a lot about these through the day today. We really need also to identify and enable access to the best expertise across Europe and internationally, and that's not easy to do, actually. It's not easy to always identify the best expertise, especially if it's an urgent issue or we really require timely access. And finally, communication. That's an absolutely key recommendation, a key requirement to disseminate and share knowledge and expertise and innovation across our regulatory network and to our stakeholders. So I'm going to take each of these in turn, and I'm going to go quite fast so that we have time for discussion and just talk in a little bit more detail. So the first one is to develop these network-led partnerships. And in order to do that, we must actually, first of all, determine the best mechanisms for establishing productive interactions with academia. What should these partnerships look like? How can we establish them, and how can we sustain them? And certainly there are a number of possible models already available within Europe that are being utilised within our regulatory system and internationally. And there's a number of these in the pack as case studies, and we can discuss them in more detail later. But we've already heard about the development of regulatory science centres, separate from regulators, but with very strong links in terms of developing strategies. Denmark has just done one. We've heard about BFARM also having this translational science centre. Other agencies interact and develop partnerships by sponsoring or contributing to PhD projects, or are having assessors who are jointly healthcare professionals, so they maintain a foot in that camp, but also regulators to maintain the expertise. Other models include absolutely co-locating regulators and academics within a research institute to drive regulatory relevant research. And the Paul Ehrlich Institute is a good example here, and that's in your pack. And we also routinely employ, or I should say, have seconded national experts within our agencies, and they're absolutely critical in order to allow us to keep a front of the moving scientific landscape and capitalise on their knowledge and expertise. And then, of course, over the last few years, EMA has been very active in developing not only a broad academic network, especially with learned societies, but also with patients' bodies. And we need to explore the strengths and limitations of each of these approaches as to which is the best to manage sustainable and meaningful partnerships. And having done that, we would then be able to identify in consultation with academia which are the fundamental research projects which will really impact on our regulatory decision making, which are the really strategic areas of regulatory science that academics could best contribute to. And then goodwill alone is not going to be sufficient. We need to have a vehicle, and that's usually funding. So how can we better proactively engage with our central European funders, DG Research and Innovation, DG Sante, but also IMI, and also member state national funding agencies to propose and issue calls to establish these research collaborations. And here are some examples. We've discussed them today, but patient-reported outcomes, but also omics-based diagnostics, big data and AI we've heard about, and modelling and simulation. And importantly, with these relationships is the development of an iterative and interactive engagement between regulators, funders and academia, so that we have this two-way street where throughout the course of these projects, and here we're envisaging they would be longer term, 3 to 5 years to answer bigger questions. We don't just issue a call at the beginning and then wait to see what the outcome is, to have this engagement throughout the process so that those research outputs can impact on our regulatory decision making in a meaningful way, that tools and biomarkers, whatever they would come back into the regulatory system. We also need to ensure that data is disseminated and shared in an open science or in a fair way. And this remains a key point, and I'll touch on this later. And then lastly, to encourage training of early career scientists in regulatory science. And the second recommendation here is around leveraging these partnerships when we have an urgent regulatory science question. And we're imagining that here we're talking about relatively short-term questions, questions which would require relatively short-term projects. But in order to do this in a timely manner, we have to have this preformed, trusted network of partnerships, we would suggest, and that would be essential to really delivering in a meaningful way. And we're imagining that and we touched on this, and I didn't prompt you, Francoise, earlier, but you actually mentioned this, that these short-term projects would be driven and funded by the regulatory network. Emerging areas here that we could consider here would be diagnostics, non-clinical models we heard about today. How useful are they for regulatory decision making? What the AI lab we talked about, but also precision medicine. Is that stratification really useful for our regulatory decision making? Because it's important that this is translated into regulatory processes and tools, and also provides opportunities here, we would suggest, for early career research training. And here I mention the national experts. And we have examples of this already. We've developed networks of pharmacoepidemiologists, and Olaf Klungel, who's on our panel, will talk more about this. So I won't really dwell on this, but this is a 10-year partnership. And also NPRIMA there in a pediatric sector. But it's really important that these networks work effectively so that we can get meaningful outputs from them. The next one is around identifying and enable experts to the best expertise across Europe and internationally. And importantly, this should be in a timely manner. And anyone who's searched for reviewers for a particular topic knows how challenging this can be. And again, the development of trusted relationships really facilitates this process to enable us to bring in the best experts when we have critical decisions. And we envisage that we would need to invest in a knowledge management system to better track innovation, to share, and that's to share our information, but also to better track our internal knowledge. And we would use our databases, for example, developed through scientific advice, through orphan, through pediatrics, which could be better linked to monitoring what would be those emerging trends in science and innovation. And then potentially link these. We need to enable linkage with literature searching, for example, patent application, venture capital money, grant funding applications, to really begin to track innovation, but also to create new insights across our product lifecycle to support our regulatory decision making. And I also talk here about more flexible experts to expertise in regulatory science, but increasingly, as innovation becomes more and more specialized, we need to be able to access these experts to bring this disruptive thinking into our decision-making processes. And lastly, communication. And I really think that probably should be somewhere in this title. We need to disseminate and share our knowledge and expertise and innovation across our regulatory network, but also externally among our stakeholders. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, really key here, and it's been touched on today, but maybe not sufficiently, is training. We do need to engage with academia to develop regulatory training models, which really describe the innovation mechanisms and the underlying processes in the development of new medicines. But this is a two-way street, we would suggest, that would be mutual benefit from both sides, bringing training materials back into our regulatory network, but also improving awareness within academia of our assessment process and increasing the prominence of medicines development and regulatory processes within undergraduate and postgraduate education. And this will be a good investment for the future, increasing awareness of our needs with the data generators of the future. Second, we need to future-proof our processes to enable us to plan, to train and recruit the right expertise within the regulatory system. What is the skill set that we will need to be able to critically assess applications when we meet them? And in order to do that, we need to conduct horizon scanning. That's been talked about today, but in key areas of innovation via collaborations with academia, but also EU Innovation Network and international networks such as ICMA. And lastly, and again, we've not really touched on this much, but EMA has been proactive in data sharing and transparency, and we need to drive a data sharing culture. And this is a very complex area. There are lots of limitations around and reasons why people don't want to share data, whether it's because of academic restrictions, because of commercial properties, or really because of the difficulty of actually sharing data. It may not be pre-thought or pre-planned. And we need to drive this culture, motivate the culture to foster an open science environment which is mutually beneficial to all stakeholders. So that's a bit of a whistle-top tour in the interest of time. And then I would like to now pass over to our 6 panelists here who are going to give sort of a 5-minute perspective on from their organization's perspective on what I've just talked about. And our first panelist is Stephon Hogan from the European Commission. And I'd really liked his view on funding strategies, engagement with central funding, but also on how do we maintain the sustainability of some of these outputs which are generated through central funding. Thank you, Stephon.
Thank you, Alison. Good afternoon. It's nice to see so many people still here for the last session. That means you have real interest. I'm from DG Research and Innovation, so not DG Santé. Some of you might be more accustomed to seeing people from DG Santé in this building. But we work quite closely with the Medicines Agency on what are the research needs and what are the regulatory needs from our perspective. We feel we can contribute to part of the very ambitious agenda that's been described, but there's also other potential contributors. DG Santé was mentioned, member states, etc. So we do support research innovation, as you know, in many ways. I'd like to quickly run through some of the ways in which I feel it's relevant to this audience and this initiative. We fund basic research. That's part of the shopping list, I think. But of course, this is completely bottom-up. So it's a fantastic opportunity. The current framework program has a budget of about 2 billion a year for basic research, a lot of which goes to life sciences. We also have the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions, which promote the mobility of young researchers doing basic research. We have perhaps what is also well known by some of you is translational research programs through the collaborative research projects, often large scale. They can involve many partners across Europe and beyond. So it's also an opportunity for international collaboration. And these projects can involve academics, of course, but also industry, large and small, patient organizations, and in fact any legal entity that's relevant to the implementation of a project, including, for instance, national competent authorities or the Medicines Agency. These projects are usually 3 to 5 years, but they can be longer. And the standard or typical EU contribution varies depending on the ambitions of the project from 3 or 4 million euros to up to 15 or 30 million euros, depending really on the scale of the task at hand. These topics are the areas that we fund, the priorities that we identify are done through a process of consultation. We have advisory groups, independent advisory groups. We also look at what we have funded in the past, where it makes particular sense to do things at a European level, not at a national level, and indeed where it makes sense to do things at an international level beyond Europe. As I said, these topics tend to be broad, but they do offer the opportunity for very ambitious initiative. And for these, we are also can consult the Medicines Agency if we feel it's appropriate. And I think we have had those discussions in the past, and I think we should be doing perhaps more intensively in the light of this initiative. DC also, through the framework program, contributes to our MI, this public-private partnership, which could also contribute, I guess. But that's really largely in the hands of the industry, which decides on the topics, the priorities for IMI. We can support training, again, through the Marie Sklodowska-Curie actions, and in particular through the research and innovation staff exchange programs, which I think could be particularly relevant. We also support the development of infrastructures, and we'll hear more about some key infrastructures such as BBMRI, ERIC, and Elixir in a few minutes. And finally, we also try to tackle some of the framework conditions. We can have small, what we call coordination and support actions to address networking, training. We have also a new project on cohorts, trying to inventorize and improve access to cohorts in Europe. And the second part of my talk is really about one of these, which is just about to be launched. It was mentioned a couple of times this morning, the STARS project. This is intended to develop a strategy to strengthen regulatory science in Europe, to improve success in regulatory scientific advice. This initiative is involving national competent authorities from 17 countries, which I think is a first. In fact, I don't think any national competent authorities have been involved in framework program projects before. And of course, EMA, the Medicines Agency, will be associated to the project. There are also academic partners, and amongst other things, this initiative will inventorize this existing support activities for regulatory scientific advice training. It will also devise modules for curricula that can be proposed to education organizations for postgraduate programs and qualification. There will be pilot projects to transfer best practice and indeed implement these curricula. The project will also make recommendations to ensure sustainable support for academic researchers and propose additional support mechanisms if appropriate. So overall, STARS aims to strengthen regulatory knowledge in general by reaching the clinical scientists during professional training or qualification, and in addition to get the attention of academic researchers very early in planning research projects, because we can see when they come to EMA, it's too late and they don't have the right tools and knowledge to go through. So I think I've spoken long enough. The project will start in January of next year, and we really hope that also national competent authorities and other academic partners can be involved. They don't have to be the formal parts of the projects, to be involved in consultations and activities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephon. So I suppose your message is we can be ambitious. There is a route to be ambitious, but we need to work out the mechanisms to push regulatory science up the agenda, these applied projects, and maybe the STARS route is one way to do that. Okay, thank you very much. So we will move on to Dr. Serena Scollin, who's Head of Human Genomics and Translational Data. Translational data, from Alexa. And I'm really keen to hear, Serena, among your other things, how we can influence, as regulators, data generation. Where do we need to be in the conversation to make sure that the sort of outcome measures we're interested in, and maybe the quality that we would like to see, is there in the data? Thank you.
Okay, so for those of you who don't know, Elixir is an intergovernment organisation that provides data infrastructure for the 500,000 life scientists across Europe. It's been established nearly 5 years ago now to unite Europe's leading life science organisations in managing the increasing volume of data that's being generated by publicly funded research. And the remit really is to coordinate the resources into a single infrastructure. So that helps the researchers to find and share the data, exchange expertise, and agree on best practices in this area. So we currently have 22 members. Each member has a node, which is a network of organisations that works within Elixir. And the work we do is organised into various platforms. So we have data, tools, compute, interoperability, and training. And then we have communities that bring together the experts in specific areas across Europe, so to develop standards, services, training within specific domains. So the most relevant one here probably is the human data and rare disease area, which is great because that's the one I head up, so I can tell you a bit more about that one. And our vision is to facilitate discovery, access, sharing and analysis of genomics data, which includes rare disease, and link it to other data types. And do this at a scale that's not really achieved yet, so we're talking millions and millions of participants, and then to demonstrate, and this is something that we don't really have many examples of, but to demonstrate how we can use that infrastructure to impact translation of genomics research into medicine. And this is probably the key point here that we can do more on in this environment that we're talking about today. So not to go on too much about my favourite area, but as you know, the healthcare as you know, the amount of genomics data at the moment is massively increasing. So over the last decade, due to developing technologies, we have massive amounts of genomics data, and it's now being generated more from the healthcare domain. So whereas now we're looking at maybe 20% that's generated from healthcare, by 2022, 80% of the human genomic sequences are going to be generated from the national initiatives and more from a healthcare background. So we need to link that data with other types of data, electronic health records, proteomics, self-reported data, to take advantage of that data and reuse that effectively. So now's the time to really ensure that regulatory science is gaining as much as possible from these large data sets, for example, how they can look at pharmacogenomic, integrative pharmacometric studies, and innovation in the regulatory domain. So Alison mentioned in her presentation that data sharing is key. And Elixir is obviously a key area. We're working to identify, set and disseminate global interoperable and reusable standards. And those standards must be persistent, stable and fit for purpose. So we have to leverage what we have rather than develop new standards and ontologies, otherwise we're reinventing the wheel as we go. And it's clear for this domain as well that we can't have input into regulatory domain at a late stage because we have to have standards that can go through the entire drug development pipeline. Needs to be a seamless path from early to late stage drug development. So the regulatory domain needs to be around the table to set these standards, and how we do that is something that I think we need to touch upon today. We're working at Elixir with international standard setting agencies such as the Global Alliance for Genomics. And I think this is something that we can think about how to really bring into the regulatory domain. Alison also mentioned a recommendation that there's a need to identify and access the best expertise across Europe and internationally, and that's especially important here in managing human data, which currently sits in the research community, the expertise rather than the healthcare. And so I think, again, the structure of Elixir particularly lends itself to be a good way to get into this expertise and really channel the expertise we have across Europe rather than trying to seek out experts as we go. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into how we implement all this too much, but just to say we have human genomic data or human data communities that discuss priorities and tackle issues, mostly members from our nodes, but we also have external observers. We have several projects that are developing ways of discovering data, federating human data across Europe, looking at how we can share metadata and make it fair, findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable, and also have a secure local data store. So we're looking at how we can access data across Europe and internationally. We're working then to adopt best practices that can be applied across other communities as well, such as proteomics. And as I focused here mainly on human data there, I just wanted to mention there are a few projects of relevance that might also be mentioned by other speakers. To innovation in regulatory science, which include the Corbell project, which is bridging biomedical sciences research infrastructures, and it will be continued from 2029 with the IOSC Life project. We have eTransafe project, where we're building tox system support, and here we have a workshop that's planned next year that the EMA could possibly be involved in. We need to have confidence in the workflows that we're developing, that they're reproducible and validated. There's a project in the grant preparation stage, which is looking at establishing inventory and standards for personalised medicine across Europe. EU stands 4PM. And also a project that will kick off in January, an IMI project called FAIR Plus, which is establishing to make data from FPIA and IMI fair. So I think I'll leave you with one question to ponder, which will be really how will the EMA ensure that the regulatory framework needs and sometimes unique challenges are considered as we work with the academics in this area, and how can you leverage Elixir to do that?
Thank you very much, Serena. I mean, I would probably come back to you a little bit, because I would want to know, how do we raise awareness within your community that we are sitting here and would like to use your data? I mean, an absolute key thing that's been raised through the HMA-EMA Big Data Task Force is, for example, the need to link genomic data with clinical data. But within that clinical data, we would really like to see treatment outcomes. We'd like to see the medicine recorded, the dose of the medicine recorded, and the length of time a patient was on it. And that's often not in these data sets, or not really considered. So I suppose what we need to work through is, how do we raise awareness at the inception of these projects to actually touch base? If you have comments now, or we can discuss later.
Yeah, should we discuss later in time?
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So our next panelist is Olaf Klungel from the University of Utrecht. And Olaf is a professor of pharmacoepidemiology methods and also head of division of pharmacoepidemiology and clinical pharmacology. And so will give us an academic perspective, but also is involved in our NCEP network. So we'll, I hope, also touch a little bit on that and the strengths and limitations of that approach. Thank you, Olaf.
Right. Thank you, Alison. Yes, I will certainly say a bit about the NCEP network. So my division is actually a member of the NCEP network, and NCEP stands for the European Network of Centers for Pharmacoepidemiology and Pharmacovigilance. The network was initiated by EMA a bit more than 10 years ago, and also coordinated by EMA. And currently there are about 170 members of that network, and all members are public institutions and CROs, all involved in research in pharmacoepidemiology and pharmacovigilance. And the overall aim of NCEP is to strengthen the monitoring of benefit risk of medicines in Europe. And there are several activities that NCEP is facilitating. So first is bringing together expertise and resources in pharmacoepidemiology and pharmacovigilance across Europe, and providing a platform for collaborations. And there's an annual meeting, so once per year all the centers meet, and there's opportunity to discuss on different projects, different issues. And another important activity that has been part of the NCEP program from the beginning is to develop and maintain methodological standards on and governance principles for research in pharmacoepidemiology and pharmacovigilance. And finally, to facilitate the conduct of multi-center, multi-country studies. And all these studies are mainly observational in nature. So this is really a network of centers that conduct observational research on safety and effectiveness of drugs. Now, if I look back on these 10 years, I think actually important deliverables have been the guidance on methodological standards for post-authorization studies, and guidance not as a cooking book, how you should do these studies, but more principles and lessons learned in pharmacoepidemiology to consider when designing and conducting these studies. So we give the state-of-the-art advice, guidance on methodological issues, and this is updated annually. And what we can see is that it's also consulted quite a lot by various people on the website. So an important resource of methodological expertise. I think that's also can also be very useful if we are sort of embarking on these new data sources, new techniques, machine learning, artificial intelligence. I think the NCEP network can contribute very much in terms of assessing causality, if you're interested in causal relationships, and also the sort of the biases that you might have when analyzing these data, and how to prevent them or control for them. So EMA has also facilitated, or NCEP has facilitated the conduct of many studies funded by EMA. So there indeed has been funding by EMA to conduct studies, but also many initiatives have started from the network, such as the IMI Protect project that was also coordinated by EMA. So we heard before that EMA should be more involved in these projects more often. They were involved in this project very much as a coordinator, and I'm maybe a bit biased, but my own experience has been very good in the sense that besides the scientific and other output from this project, it also very much improved the dialogue and discussions by different stakeholders, including industry and academia, and so that's an offspring of such projects. I think that is very important and should not be overlooked if we start on these projects. In terms of the role of EMA in coordinating the NCEP network, I think that's really key. So this is also an activity that I would say that I would encourage EMA to continue, and it has resulted in a lot of important activities, and many projects have been initiated via this network. In terms of other sort of improvements that could be made, I think I mentioned the funding mechanism from EMA. So there are tenders to conduct studies. For EMA, you can have a framework contract. So that's the first step, and then the second step, there's a tender, and that those framework contractors can then compete with each other for such a specific contract, and that's, I think, where the improvement could be made, because it's not a very efficient process. So I think the first step, you really need to have a framework contract with consortia that are capable of doing these studies. But then again, in the second step, to if you want a quick developing of a protocol and conducting studies, then maybe you should work with dedicated partners for specific topics. Not sure how this should be worked out, but this is something we need to consider, because it's not very efficient. So I think this is an area of improvement. As I mentioned, the NCEP network consists of public institutions. So there's an FPA observer, also at the steering group, but also at the meetings. And this is something we heard also today, that for instance, the network that Peter van Meer is representing, the Dutch Regulatory Science Network, they have equal voice from industry and regulators and academia. And this is something maybe also for the NCEP network to consider how we can interact with industry in another way that may improve actually also the interaction between the different stakeholders. If I have some time left, I would like to...
Yeah, a couple more minutes. Yeah.
Right, thank you. So the last thing I would like to mention is on training. Alison already made a notion of different models. So PhD students that are half-time assessors at a regulatory agency, half-time doing their PhD research. So you're training PhDs on the job, and I think that's a very interesting model, and our university is involved in that as well. Other training possibilities, I think, are also needed in terms of drug regulatory science. And an initiative I'd like to mention is the EU2P network. That's also started with IMI funding, and currently is self-sustaining. So it's an e-learning master in pharmacovigilance and pharmacoepidemiology. It was developed in collaboration with industry, academia, and also regulators. And currently the collaboration is ongoing with 6 universities, and each of the universities providing different courses in this master's program. And what is nice, I think, is that this is really focused on professionals, so either in industry or regulatory or academia, and they have joint training. So they are in the training together, even though they are from their own working place, online. They meet, they discuss, and so they get trained, but also at the same time work together in these teaching courses, which already at that stage I think is important to have the interaction. And that's, I think, something that maybe we should do more. Also, maybe nationally have these training programs. There are more training programs, but I think that's also an important aspect to consider if we looking into the future. So we need people with good expertise, and then we have to find good ways to train them. Thanks.
Okay, I have to cut you there. Thank you very much, Olaf. Okay, our next panelist is Luca Zangarini from the European Reference Networks Research Working Groups, which is a relatively new EU initiative. He's also head of Medical Genetics Department at the Rizzoli Orthopedic Institute. Thank you very much, Luca.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Let me briefly introduce HRN, because they're relatively new. They are sort of 2-year-old in a few months. And what they really represent are 24 thematic network involving 300 hospitals all over Europe and involving 900 healthcare providers that are spread in 27 member states. So in a way, big number for rare disease. So big number for little number of patients in a way. But why is this the case? Because due to the difficulties of treating patient and as EMA knows very well, also difficulties in finding good therapies and good treatment for these patients. So this is the result of a it's a recent result, but of a very long story. Actually started in 2002 with the possibility of exchanging patients from different countries. And it was the first, I would say, group of patients in which this kind of necessity was rising to a very high level was exactly for those rare disease patients in which it was not possible to get an appropriate treatment in their own country. Then there was the division, and there was a sort of grouping of the, I would say, more than 5,000 rare disease in 24 thematic groups that are now representing the 24 networks that are actually working. So as you can imagine, ERN were started mainly for care of the patient. At the beginning, when we were discussing about this issue, it was clear that it was 80-90% of the activity of ERN were involving in care and on homogenizing the treatment for this patient, because as you can imagine, there are big discrepancy according to the different countries for treating this patient. But nowadays, it's getting more and more clear that research is, I would say, a major player, because if it's not going to be possible to find a good treatment for this patient if you don't run an appropriate research on these kind of diseases. That's the reason why among the ERN coordinator we have established the research working group that it's really a newborn. It has been established 1 year ago. And that's the reason why we have started to set up a meeting, specific meeting on this kind of activity. We are currently running a questionnaire among the 24 different ERN in order to set up an ERN research strategy. And this is going to be the work that will be done in 2019. But this year already, it was clear the needs of an interaction with regulators. And in May, we already had here at EMA a meeting on ERN and regulators and EMA in order to clearly define what are the different competences and how this interaction could be fruitful, especially for the rare disease patient. The meeting was really participated. The outcome is going to be ready in a few weeks. It was an RD action meeting, and the report will be published pretty soon. And the meeting was so interesting that we have decided to keep on going and to have a meeting every year with EMA. We know that next year is going to be a bit problematic, but still, we will manage for that. We are currently keep on collecting the different needs of the ERNs, and this is going to be the closure. And we had a meeting yesterday here at EMA in which it was clear that one of the most clear part of the needs is training on regulator. So one of the aspects that we were discussing in this meeting yesterday was the possibility to set up, according when this collection of needs will be done, to set up training modules, as you were already mentioning, for all the ERN, and to set up a sort of a core of people within every ERN that would take care of all these aspects connected to, I would say, the possibility of running new therapies. We are currently experiencing also some problem, meaning that it's not clear. We don't have clear rules yet. And this is a work that DG Santé is working on how to approach the private. And this public-private interaction is still a sort of a break for the activity of the ERN that we hope it will be solved pretty soon, because there are many possibilities for running a good research within the ERN, including registries that are already, I would say, very good level clinical registry, but they need to go through all the appropriate training in order to become also registered that could be accessible also from the regulators. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luca. So it's obviously key that we continue with our partnership so that we actually tailor our activities to meet your needs, but also prevent duplication of effort. Thank you. So our next speaker is Eric Steinfelder, who's the director of BBMRI ERIC, which is a European research infrastructure for biobanks, and I'll let Eric tell you a little bit more about that. And Eric, I'm particularly interested in hearing about how you maintain and sustain the partnerships through this infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alison. Thanks for being here, also from my side. I will keep it short because time is ticking and I see people get nervous to catch their plane. As said, just a short explanation about BBMRI ERIC. We are an ERIC, which is a legal status for European research infrastructures. We focus mainly on biobanking, and we have 21 member states that drive the organization and that we try to help with services. Our main goal is to make sure that the biobanks in these 21 member states are visible and that the samples that they have in their biobanks and the associated data is actually being used. To give you an idea, we have a catalog that covers around 100 million samples that we potentially could share with research, with industry, with anybody who is interested when you meet the requirements and the legislation. From our point of view, biobanking is one of the most important things in the world, but to be honest, that doesn't cure anything. So we need to look at the bigger picture. We have been setting up the infrastructure in the last 5 years, mainly looking at ourselves. What do we need to do? How can we make sure that we have added value? And now for us, the time is to step externally and to look for partners, because we need to look at the total workflow. How do you, at the end, make treatments possible? One of the things we did is reach out to 2 other medical research infrastructures. ECRIN is focusing on clinical trials and also in the back. EATRIS is here as well. They are also an ERIC. They are focusing on translational medicine. And with the 3 of us, we cover quite a bit of the, let's say, personalized medicine workflow. And there also we come to the discussion around regulatory science. From a biobank perspective, we don't see that every day. So I'm very pleased that I'm here today, learn a lot, and also learn about the things that you are doing, which we all really encourage. Every now and then we have contact, but it would be great based on this initiative to have that on a more regular basis, where I would actually like to encourage also to involve the other 2 medical RIs, because we really partner up, and I think for the 3 of us it's good to have a strong voice together. And in addition, I think it's the same for Elixir. The 3 of us also are in close contact with the patient, but from the data side we already work a lot together in all kinds of projects. So the more impact we can have, the better it is, I think, for the future. Last but not least, I would like to share an initiative that we started last year, which is called the Stakeholder Forum. And there we try to meet with different stakeholders, industry, patient organizations, to see what are their requirements, what are their needs, where are the gaps with the things that we can deliver, and how can we make sure that we are closer together. And actually one of the stakeholders should also be the regulatory bodies. It's something that is not there, but really something that we would encourage. Timing is everything, so if we can do that before 2025 and have something good in place, we would really be happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. Okay, and then last, but certainly not least, is Vivka Lobka, who's Head of Innovation Office at the Scientific Advice Department at BfArM. She's also representing the EU Innovation Office network, but I think may also talk a little bit about STARS as well. Thank you very much, Vivka.
Yes, thank you first for the invitation. We heard a lot today about the importance of scientific advice and the early interaction with academic groups. And I think the STARS project will be an important step forward for further collaboration between the academic sector and the regulators. In short, STARS stands for Strengthening Training of Academia in Regulatory Sciences and Supporting Regulatory Scientific Advice. We heard from the Commission the background why this project is funded by the European Commission within Horizon 2020, that there's that the lack of specific relevant know-how in regulatory science can result in delay of products placed on the market, and it's innovations mainly come from the academic sector. So it's very important that academia is well aware of the regulatory requirements and also of the support mechanism that are already in place. And what the STARS consortium, you heard, it's coordinated by the bee farm, and there are 18 partners from the innovation network working closely together, also with the EMA and all relevant stakeholders like UNETA, and especially with the academia research centers, to identify their needs and to see if there are gaps in the supporting activities that are already in place. And we heard today a lot about the initiatives that are already in place regarding training of academia and also of supporting activities like the PRIME initiatives and scientific advice and so on. And what the STARS project will focus on is not to reinvent the wheel, but to identify and analyze the effectiveness of these initiatives that are already in place in the European countries to support academia. And what we want to do is to improve the knowledge of the academia and also to improve the success in regulatory scientific advice. And this will be done by a survey collecting information about the initiatives that are already in place and to ask for the needs of all stakeholders. And then we want to identify best practices in training and in scientific advice procedures that can be transferred to other countries in order to improve the knowledge of academia with the overall aim to bring innovations to patients in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wiebke. That's fascinating. I think I've got 5 more minutes, haven't I, Tony? So just before I go to you, I'd just like, we've talked a little bit here about how regulators would interact more with external academics, and I'd just like to explore a little bit more the Paul Ehrlich model, if I can, with Martina Schulz-Lenz, who's our chair of our CAT committee, about how that model works, where you're actually co-locating sort of regulators and research scientists within the same building. Would you mind just giving us a little bit of a view on that? Thanks.
Yes, thank you very much. So yes, I work at the Paul Ehrlich Institute, and I'm now, since last year, February, the chair of the Committee for Advanced Therapies. So the ATMPs are those products where the technical innovation in science is entering so fast into our products and into our development. So it has been quite favorable to have as a background an agency like the Paul Ehrlich Institute, where scientists, molecular biologists, and regulators work door to door. And we've had in our institute, we have a long tradition in supporting academic developers with advice, and a long tradition in communicating with them and exchanging information, inviting them and doing workshops with them, addressing their needs, and they informing us. So this is quite has been a favorable environment, and we are also, of course, the STARS project where the Paul Ehrlich Institute, together with the Bee Farm, is coordinating, is now bringing this to the European network. So I think that I'm very curious to see how this works out. And let me just say one word to the Committee for Advanced Therapies, where again there I have we have implemented interaction between scientists, physicians, and committee members. And they have, I just want to give you 2 examples. What we do is that we do workshops in areas of interest. For example, last year we had, in September, we had a workshop where experts, scientists and physicians came to the Committee for Advanced Therapies. And we had an exchange of scientific and regulatory information on recombinant AAV vectors, which, as you know, are now coming for marketing authorization, coming this year, coming next year. So that's a forum that I have worked on to provide this important, for the ATMPs, so important exchange of information between these spaces. And what we also do, the second type of format, is that we do go to scientific conferences. Last week there was the European Gene and Cell Therapy Conference, and this is also an answer to Rogerio Kaspar, I think, who mentioned that we're doing that not enough. But yes, we people that are in the Committee for Advanced Therapies, we do that, and we do regulatory sessions like last week. And attending such meetings gives us the opportunity to learn the newest of targeting identification measures for genome editing, for example. And you know, genome editing products are in clinical trials in Europe. So, of course, we have to be knowledgeable about that. We have to have this knowledge in our committee. So, and at the same time, in these cut regulatory sessions, we present, but not only we present, we have very long, and that's important for me, a good time where we exchange information and we have questions and answer sessions with academic developers. So I think these are things that are really help us in our committee to interact, to communicate, to understand, and to, at the same time, do horizon scanning. So just this as an example. Thank you very much.
So just a quick follow-up question, Martin. I would imagine that co-location in that way really would enable the regulatory focused colleagues to drive more the research agenda of the scientists, does it?
Both ways.
Okay. Tony, 1 or 2 minutes for a question here from Virginia? Okay.
Sorry, so I'll be very brief. It's Jenny Hodge. I'm here for FPS. So first, a suggestion, and second, a request. The suggestion really goes back to the opening presentation from Hans Gehrig, where he talked about also social sciences. So what you're doing with this important work around regulatory science is you're trying to understand how a new community or a science is developing around a community of practice and participation. You have scientists in Europe who know that path very well. They've studied this in many other areas of technology. They're science policy experts that I think would be more than happy to join you in this progress, because it's excellent research for them, too, to understand how a new frame of science really comes to being. And that's, I think, could help you with your knowledge management system, because I think they'll do it for free, not only with citation analysis and patent analysis, but also looking at partnerships and research. And I'm more than happy to give you offline some good starting points, because that's where I come from in a science policy background. That leads me to my request, which is if you are building a strong community for regulatory science, you need to have all the voices in the room. So as much as possible, don't neglect the fact that your industry colleagues, including within our companies and FPN elsewhere, we fund PhD students. A lot of us have PhDs, and we continue to do research ourselves. We'd love to be part of those conversations with you, because we think we could contribute, but we would also gain a lot. And this would really create, I think, that what people sometimes refer to as that triple helix structure that could work very well. So it's just a request to, when you have these community developments, please don't forget us in the process, because we could be an important contributor to that.
Thank you. That's points well taken. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to have to end here, but I would like just a round of applause to thank our panelists for their contributions. Thank you.